Welcome back, Year 13s. Today we're going to be focusing on the size and diversity of the USA as well as the machinery of government, which was outlined through the US Constitution written by the Founding Fathers. Now, in relation to the size and diversity of the USA is a vast country. The entire UK would fit into the state of Oregon. It takes as long to fly from Boston to LA as from London to Boston. It is also a geographically and culturally diverse country. It's often been described as a hyphenated society. So, in relation to the size and diversity of the USA, we've got this notion of a melting pot, that American society consists of people from diverse lands, cultures, languages, and religions. Okay? Now, the size of the USA, the vast sort of country that the USA is, that requires a need for decentralization. Okay, and what we mean by decentralization is ensuring that powers are reserved for the states within the USA. Okay, that not all power primarily rests with the central government. So instead of a unitary system of government that we have in the UK, whereby UK Parliament is legally sovereign, okay, in the USA, we have a federal system of government whereby decentralization is the crux of the system of government. Okay, so diversity is conveyed then through the different laws, through the laws that differ from state to state regarding elections, law and order, as well as crime and punishment. Okay, so different regions of the USA clearly show different ideological beliefs. So, for example, you've got the conservative South. Obviously, for some of you, Texas may come to mind there as part of the Deep South. And we've got the liberal Northeast, with the West Coast liberal leaning, such as the cities of LA and San Francisco within California. Okay, now this has implications for political parties in terms of the support and foundations that they have across the USA. So Californian Democrats are very different from Texas Democrats, just as South Carolina Republicans are different from Massachusetts Republicans. Okay, so Californian Democrats, for example, they might be very left-leaning, very liberal-leaning, whereas Texas Democrats, they might be more moderate Democrats. Okay, more towards the center of the political spectrum. Okay, now a key distinction to make here then, okay, is the classifications between the sort of regions of the United States of America and how these regions differ in terms of their ideological beliefs and their views. Okay, I'll let you read this in your own time, but one comparison that I would like to draw is between the Deep South and Yankeedom. Okay, so the Deep South was established by English slave lords from Barbados and was styled as a West Indies-style slave society, Woodard notes. It has a very rigid social structure and fights against government regulation that threatens individual liberty. Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, and South Carolina are all part of the Deep South. What we mean by government regulation is how far the government, okay, interferes in the matters of the state, okay, because then it becomes a question of if the government interferes too much in the matters of the states and of individuals, that could then impinge upon and curb individual liberties, okay, individual rights. Okay, so what they prefer in the Deep South is very limited government regulation, okay, what we call limited government. So very little government interference in the affairs of states and individuals. Okay, if we compare this, however, to Yankeedom, we've got that encompassing the entire north of New York City and spreading through Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Yankeedom values education, intellectual achievement, communal empowerment, and citizen participation in government as a shield against tyranny. Yankees are comfortable with government regulation. Okay, Woodard notes that Yankees have a utopian streak. The area was settled by radical Calvinists. Okay, so one of the key sort of differences to draw between the Deep South and Yankeedom is that those states within the Deep South, they're against government regulation. Okay, they want limited government. Okay, they want very little interference from the government in the affairs of the states and in the affairs of individuals. Whereas those in the sort of Yankeedom region, okay, they're comfortable, okay, they're accepting of government interference in the affairs of states and individuals, okay? Right, so what is the impact of all of this diversity on the USA's national politics? That's something for you to think about and make notes on from your reading of page 3 and page 4. Okay, so the outcome of the War of Independence. So John Keegan, it is not the fact of gaining independence that makes the American Revolution historically significant, but it is the establishment of a new system of government. So in regards to the machinery of government, we've got the US Constitution formed and created by the Founding Fathers in 1789, okay, and that basically outlines, it provides us with the machinery of government in the United States of America, okay, the fact that there will be an executive which has a president, the fact that there will be two chambers of Congress which make up the legislative branch, and the fact that there'll also be a judiciary, a Supreme Court. Okay, but arguably the American rebels had not intended revolution. I say again, said John Adams, that resistance to innovation and to unlimited claims of Parliament and not any new form of government was the object of the revolution. The national government. So framing new state constitutions was far smoother than creating a central government. Without the common enemy, there was little holding the states together. Any sense of American nationality was, at most, embryonic. Most Americans thought of themselves as Virginians or New Yorkers first, and Americans second. Okay, now this is really, really key. Okay, and that is why the Articles of Confederation were drawn up and favoured by these independent colonies, because there was very little which bound them together, apart from the fact that they were united in defeating and getting rid of this common enemy in the British. Okay, they did not like the British, the way that the British ruled, because of the fact that they were being taxed. The American people were being taxed without their consent and without any sort of representation in British Parliament, so that they could have a say in their own affairs, so that they could have a say in making their own laws. So that's really, really important, that the only thing that really brought them together was the fact that they wanted to get rid of the British. The colonies had rebelled against the British in order to control their own internal affairs. Now, this is key. The independent colonies, those 13 colonies, they wanted full self-governance, okay? They wanted self-government in the sense that they wanted to make their own laws and they wanted to control their own lands, okay? The struggle with Britain had bred a distrust of central authority, okay? These 13 colonies, the American people, they feared the reappearance of the British. Okay, they feared a strong central government because of the fact that it might resemble British rule, in the sense that they would be asked to submit sort of sovereignty to this central government, which would mean that they'd be required to perhaps pay taxes, etc., etc. At the same time, some of the Federalists, they realized that the Articles of Confederation were weak and ineffective. Because if these 13 independent colonies were completely independent as they were, if there was a problem or an issue between two of those colonies, for example, it might break out into war because there is no central authority, there is no central government to solve those problems or issues. And in fact, the fact that there might be problems between those states, it might lead to the reappearance of the British itself. So since a strong national government would necessarily diminish the state's authority, many Americans resisted it as being a repudiation of the revolution itself. Okay, so that basically means that the Americans resisted the creation for as long as possible of a central government because that was a basis upon which the American Revolution was fought itself. Okay, the American Revolution was fought as a way of getting rid of this central authority, which at the time was the British. Okay, so in the midst of a war to check tyranny, Americans had no wish to create a new one. They had no wish to create a new central government. Okay, but by the mid 1780s, many Americans were dissatisfied with the Articles of Confederation and they demanded stronger national government. They realized that the Articles of Confederation were weak and ineffective, okay, and everything was being prolonged, and you'll find that out from the Federalism of the USA article. Okay, so there was growing national consensus, there was growing, national consciousness, conservative nationalism. Most nationalist leaders were men of substance and thought they were the right kind of men to make sure the Republican experiment succeeded. Concerned by democratic excesses in state and local government, others thought the Articles of Confederation were working well, and they feared a stronger central government would replicate the British government. Okay, so that is what the anti-federalists believed. The anti-federalists believed that the Articles of Confederation were working well, they were in favour of it, and they feared the stronger central government because they feared that it would resemble the British government. So there was interstate disharmony, looking after state interests, interstate tariffs, Virginia and Maryland Agreement, the Annapolis Meeting, okay? So the Articles in Federation, for them to be effective, states would need to be able to work together, okay? But in the long term, this was really unsustainable. So the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers, obviously, they met in the Philadelphia Convention in May 1787, and they began to draw up a constitution by scrapping the Articles of Confederation. And part of this constitution is a Bill of Rights. So they make up the first 10 amendments of the US Constitution, and as well as these Bill of Rights, you've also got the checks and balances between the different branches of government. Now, the 10th Amendment of the US Constitution, okay, it states that states and individual rights are to be protected, okay? So anything in terms of power not mentioned by the US Constitution, those powers are then reserved by the individual states to exercise. Okay, and here we can see the three branches of US government. So the US Constitution outlined a strict separation of powers, okay? The Constitution outlined a separation of powers whereby the legislative branch, so Congress, the executive, the president, and the judiciary, the Supreme Court, they were completely separate. And one of the ways in which we can note sort of visibly how we can tell that these branches of government are completely separate is the fact that no one member can be a part of two different branches at the same time, okay? Apart from the vice president. So the vice president is obviously part of the executive branch, but they also preside over the Senate at times. That is the only exception. So, for example, Barack Obama, before campaigning to become president in 2008, okay, he was a senator. To campaign and run as a presidential candidate, he resigned from the Senate, okay, before then becoming president in 2008 following the presidential election, okay? Now, this is interesting because we can start drawing comparisons already between the USA and the UK. The USA has a strict separation of powers, whereas in the UK we have a fusion of powers, okay? The executive in the legislature and the legislative branch of government in the UK, they are fused together, okay? The executive, so that's the Prime Minister and his cabinet, they sit in Parliament, okay? And the way in which government dominates Parliament is essentially through the idea that government essentially make up a part of Parliament, and if the government have a majority in Parliament following a general election, they're able to dominate Parliament because they have the majority of members, and so they are able to see through the passage of legislation a lot easier. In the US, however, we'll explore the impact of this separation of powers on lawmaking in particular. So just to clarify, Congress includes both chambers of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Those elected to the Senate, they're called senators. Those elected to the House of Representatives are congressmen, congresswomen. Okay. Now the key thing here is making a link back to last lesson and the Connecticut Compromise. Okay. The Senate, it is elected equally across the states. So each of the 50 states, they elect 2 senators today, which makes up 100 senators in total. The House of Representatives, okay, that is based, their membership is based on the proportions of the population in each of the states. So there's 435 members in total, the House of Representatives, and each state elects a certain number of members according to the proportion of their population. So for example, a state like California elects many more members of the House of Representatives than a state such as New York. Okay. Now, if you read, what I would require you to do then is read page 8 and page 8 and answer these 3 questions. What are the 3 different branches of government and what are their roles? How many members are there of the 2 chambers of Congress? And why were these 2 chambers a fundamental part of the Connecticut Compromise? And this is quite a tough question, but by making a link back to last lesson, the need for this compromise was essential, okay, because the Articles of Confederation were weak and ineffective, and what they needed to do then, what the Founding Fathers needed to do, was that they needed to strike a balance between a strong central government, okay, but also states and individuals' rights, okay? So they needed a strong central government which also had respect for the rights of states and individuals, okay? And this strong central government could not resemble the British, okay, or replicate the way in which the British ruled. Okay, after that, if you read page 9, so this page, and answer the following questions. How can we tell that a strict separation of powers exists in the USA? And what does Neustadt mean by there's not strictly a separation of powers, but they're separate institutions sharing powers? Okay, what does Neustadt mean by that quotation? I hope that's clear, Year 13s. If you've got any questions, please let me know on Google Classroom.